There's a legend in Liverpool about a bird and a building. Two liverbirds perch proudly atop the Royal Liver Building on the banks of the River Mersey. Bertie looks out across the city and Bella gazes across the water. Now, there are various versions of the liverbird myth. One has it that the reason the birds face in opposite directions and are chained down is that should they ever mate and fly away, the River Mersey will flood and the city of Liverpool will be destroyed. And my favourite version of this myth has it that the only reason the birds would ever fly away is if a truly virtuous woman walked past the building. This is a picture of me on my wedding day with the Royal Liver Building in the background, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions from the fact that the birds are still very much in situ. I am a proud Liverpudlian and married to an equally proud first language Welshman. And one of the things that drew us together when we first met were mutual understanding of the importance of place and how a connection to place can shape one's identity and sense of self in a way that no other aspect of yourself can. I've always delighted in the fact that I am from Liverpool, and just a few bars of You'll Never Walk Alone can lift my spirits on all but the darkest of days and remind me that I am part of something bigger than myself. In her book, The Psychology of Belonging, Kelly Ann Allen argues that we can trace the human need for belonging back to our prehistoric ancestors. They relied on group living for their physical safety and their very survival. These days, we generally have the economic and physical security that means that we don't need to rely on this model of group living. And instead, we have a more dispersed living style. I'm an example of this. Having left Liverpool to go to university, I haven't lived there for 25 years. It remains very much the home of my heart, but it isn't anymore my home in any practical sense. Now, Allen argues that we are yet to understand fully the psychological consequences of this more dispersed style of living. But there are two models that might help us with this understanding. And the first is Abraham Maslow's 1943 model, the hierarchy of needs. Now, Maslow argues that once our physiological needs for air, water, food, and so forth are satisfied, we next move on to satisfying our need for physical safety, and then our need for love and belonging. And he also argues that the higher up we get in this pyramid, the more difficult it is to satisfy these needs. Now, we could be forgiven for thinking that in the age of digital connection, it is easier than ever to satisfy our need for love and belonging. These days, we can make connections thanks to the development of technology over the last 200-300 years. Starting with the postal service, moving through telephones and telegraphs, onto email and instant messaging, and now we have a whole plethora of social media platforms at our fingertips. However, studies have demonstrated that these kinds of digital connections do not provide us with the same sense of psychological belonging and sense of belonging as face-to-face connections. 2nd century Greek philosopher Hierocles' model of concern describes the Stoic philosophy of cosmopolitanism, and it does so using a series of concentric circles. At the centre is the self, or the human mind. The next circle represents family, then village, then community, and so on. And the Stoics argued that it is our human responsibility to draw people from the outer circles towards ourself, towards the individual, until eventually the entirety of the human race is drawn within our area of concern. And again, we might think that the intensification of our use of digital means of connection have made this ever easier. The COVID pandemic was the catalyst for the intensification of our use of digital connection. We were prevented from having human interactions by school closures and by lockdowns. And the group that used this more than any other and have continued to do so were young adults. Now, this group are also most likely to be exposed to harmful online content and graphic videos. And these, it has been demonstrated, are damaging to their mental health, causing depression and anxiety. At the same time, this age group is most likely to suffer from climate anxiety. And while loneliness is often seen as an epidemic of old age, a 2022 study by the Campaign to End Loneliness demonstrated that in fact, it's 16 to 24-year-olds who are most likely to feel lonely. Sobering stuff. So how do Hierocles' model of concern and Liverbirds help us to support the mental health of our young people and to help inculcate in them a sense of belonging? Well, it's my belief that increased social media use, alongside, crucially, the polarisation of political and social discourse, has encouraged people to skip out the circles of village and community in Hierocles' model of concern, seek instead to use their online digital connections to establish a geographically distanced community of people who seem to have views that align exactly with their own. And this comes at the expense of making human connections with people in one's village and one's local community, one's physical locale, with whom they might inevitably not always precisely align in the tribal thinking of their online community. By making connections with the people with whom we are bound by a sense of place, we are forced to rub along with people from diverse backgrounds, lived experiences, and so forth. When I first moved to East Dulwich about 9 years ago now, I became a fan of our local football club, Dulwich Hamlet. And I started to go to matches, and after a couple of weeks, I would start to recognise regular matchgoers in the local streets. A little while later, I started to volunteer. I sold merch and organised coaches to away matches. A few times a year, I would take down my gardening tools to the ground and help to do the weeding. And when I see the blue and pink scarf in the streets around Dulwich, more intensely on match days, but not only, there's a nod and a smile of recognition, a sense of something shared with a myriad of people. I feel like I've cheated you. So far we've had the Liverbirds, but we haven't yet had the dragons. In 2021, my husband and I started to walk the Wales Coast Path. We're currently about 250 miles into an 870-mile journey, and it's going to take us some time. But already we have connected with Cymru and the idea of Welshness in all sorts of different ways. Through language, through landscape, and through all sorts of historical sites. And everywhere we go, we see the Welsh flag proudly flying. But it wasn't until recently that I learned the story behind y Ddraev Goch, or the Red Dragon. In the 12th century, Geoffrey of Monmouth recorded that the Celtish king Vortigern wanted to build a castle. And he found the perfect spot in Dinlas am Rhys, in Gwynedd, in North Wales. The only problem was that every time he started to build, the foundations collapsed. And this happened a few times until he was pretty much at his wit's end. So he consulted a local boy, believed to be the child Merlin. And this child told him that the reason that his foundations were falling down was because he was trying to build on the site of an underground lake in which lay 2 sleeping dragons, one white, representing the Saxons, or the English, and one red, representing the Celts, or the modern-day Welsh. So Vortigern took his men, and they began to dig. And sure enough, they uncovered the underground lake, and the dragons immediately woke up and started to fight. And they had a long and bloody battle, during which it seemed for the most part that the white dragon was going to be victorious. Until just at the end, the red dragon managed to overpower him. Both y Ddraev Goch and the Liverbird represent a people. A diverse people of myriad beliefs, creeds, ethnicities, and lived experiences, but a people who are bound together by a common sense of place. So, next time the problems of the world seem a little too big to solve, or the negativity of online discourse is feeling somewhat overwhelming, or maybe you're just a bit lonely, instead of clicking on that icon on your phone screen, look up, look out, step out into your community, and pretty soon you'll never walk alone.